Live and uninterrupted, the Democratic candidates for New York City Mayor face to face for the final debate before the primary election. This debate is brought to you by CBS 2, WLNY TV 1055, News Radio 880, 1010 Wins, Common Cause New York, the New York Immigration Coalition, and the New York Daily News. Here is your moderator, CBS 2 anchor, Maurice Dubois.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are coming to you live tonight from the City University of New York Graduate Center in Manhattan. It is the final face-off between the leading Democratic contenders for mayor of our city. The city's official debate program, administered by the Campaign Finance Board, requires candidates taking advantage of public campaign funds to debate. And joining me now to question the candidates, 1010 Wins reporter Juliet Papa, my colleague at CBS 2 News, Marcia Kramer, and New York Daily News City Hall Bureau Chief Jillian Jorgensen. We also want to welcome our live audience. We ask those in attendance to remain respectful and not interfere with the debate. Viewers can also watch the debate in Spanish on our sister station TV 1055 and live on Facebook.com/CBS New York. Now let's welcome the candidates, Mayor Bill de Blasio and former City Councilman Sal Albanese. Gentlemen, good evening, and you will each have 1 minute to answer the questions and 30 seconds for rebuttal as warranted. Mr. Albanese, we're going to begin with you, and a question a lot of New Yorkers are wondering, despite your long career, who are you? And what qualifies you, that you've done recently, what qualifies you, anything you've done recently to be mayor of our city?
Well, I came here as an immigrant at the age of 8 from Italy. I am the New York City story. I attended the public schools, graduated from CUNY, and I had a great career on the city council where I was considered one of the most independent members of that body. Went on to the private sector. I'm not a professional politician. I spent 20 years in law and finance, working mainly with labor and working people. So I've got a broad-based experience. I was also a school teacher for 11 years. So those experiences are preparing me for the best job in America, which is to be the mayor of New York City. I am the New York City story.
One more time, what have you done recently that qualifies you to be mayor of our city?
Well, what I've done recently is I've worked as a lawyer in finance. And as mayor of New York City, you have to be well-versed in budgeting. You have to be well-versed in finance, especially when you're dealing with our city's pension plans. And the last 20 years, I've been in the private sector. I think being in the private sector is a good thing. My opponent has spent all of his career in politics, and I think that having that experience makes you more qualified to do this job.
Thank you, sir. Mr. de Blasio, here's a true story. A political leader and his associates used pay-for-play tactics, widely regarded that way, in campaign fundraising, but were not charged with a crime. However, state and federal prosecutors insist those people did violate the intent and the spirit of the law. While there were no criminal charges, would you want people like that working for you?
Maurice, thanks to everyone who made this debate possible. And I want to say at the outset, our hearts tonight go out to everyone in the Caribbean who is facing the threat of Hurricane Irma, and obviously in Florida as well. It's a very, very difficult and painful moment, and we'll be there for people in the aftermath. To the question at hand, and I certainly understand the underlying meaning, I'm very proud of what we've achieved in this administration. I'm proud of the ethical standards that we've set and kept to throughout. And here's what we focused on all along the way. We focused on things like creating pre-K for all our kids and affordable housing for New Yorkers who needed it. Those were efforts worth fighting for. And I look at everything that we've done, and I'm very convinced that high standards were kept to, and the results speak for themselves in terms of the hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers whose lives we've improved. That's what I came here to do, make people's lives better. And I will continue that if the people give me another term.
But prosecutors say you violated the intent and spirit of the law. Would you want people like that working for you?
Look, I'm very satisfied. The way I handled things, everything was looked at very, very carefully. Tremendous amount of scrutiny that led to the clarification that we had done things the right way. And I'm content that we did things the right way and continue to do things the right way. I'm very satisfied with everyone who works for me and the high standards they hold. And if you look at what they've produced for the people in New York City, we talk about finance, on-time budgets, balanced budgets, historic reserves that have been achieved by this administration while serving people with new initiatives like pre-K and affordable housing. Okay. I'm very, very proud of this team and the quality of the work they've done.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, you have 30 seconds for
I think the people of the city of New York want integrity in government. They do care about that, despite what Bill says. And we need a higher standard for a mayor than not being indicted. And also, you know, $15 million in legal fees that he's sticking the taxpayers with when he and his aides were engaged in political activity. Basically, the prosecutors said that they violated the spirit and the intent of the law, and they acted unethically and inappropriately. They couldn't indict them because the laws are kind of murky. I think we need a government that people believe in, that you don't need to be a big donor to get access to government, and unfortunately that's the case. And I've got a number of proposals to address that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Albanese. Marsha Kramer.
Mr. Mayor, good evening.
Good evening,
Concerning corruption, should the mayor be required to notify an agency, such as the Department of Investigation or the Conflicts of Interest Board, every time a donor calls the mayor or somebody in the administration that are seeking favors? Do you think the public has the right to know that?
I think the laws and rules we have now in New York City are amongst the strictest in the entire nation. This city's been a leader in ethics reform. I wish I could say that about Washington, D.C. I wish I could say that about Albany. But here we have the strongest campaign finance law in the nation. We have very strong disclosure.
There are no laws affecting donors and letting people know what donors are asking you.
Again, I think the laws in the city, to answer your question, I think the laws we have right now are very, very clear about disclosure, about addressing conflicts of interest, about addressing campaign donations. I think the laws we have now make a lot of sense, and I've gone beyond those laws in terms of disclosure in a number of cases. But I think if you ask the question, are we right now, have we set up a legal construct to protect the interests of everyday New Yorkers and make sure our government is run ethically? I think if you look around the country, New York City is the envy of the country. We didn't used to be that way. Over decades and decades, we got a cleaner and cleaner government. We have the right laws now to make sure that things are done the right way.
So you don't think, though, that the donors that people have a right to know what donors are doing, what favors they're asking you to do?
Again, I think people have a right to know a lot of things, and that's what our current laws and rules provide for, and I think they do a lot to make sure things are done right. I'm very content with the system we have now in New York City, not in the country, not in Albany, and I think there's a lot of cynicism, rightfully, when people see what happens in those places. But if you look at New York City government and the way our ethical standards have strengthened and strengthened over years, I think we're in a very strong place right now.
Mr. Albanese, the same question to you.
I think that there isn't enough transparency. I think that we need to reform our political system, and this is bigger than Bill, because it has basically legalized corruption, and we've seen that from the investigations. They've been chronicled, despite what he says. I've got a bill that would eliminate bundling of money.
The question is this: should donors have the right to know? I mean, should people have the right to know when a donor asks the mayor for a favor?
Absolutely, that should be. It should be transparent, absolutely, no doubt about it. I don't know why we don't have that, but I would champion that as mayor, because part of my campaign, Marcia, is reforming the political system, making New York City a real model for democracy, and I've got specific proposals to do that. My democracy voucher program, my lobbying reform, my transparency issues, which I'll talk about in detail. We're not the envy of the country.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. Juliet Papa.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese. You live on Staten Island, and you've seen the devastation of Hurricane Harvey in Texas. And as Irma bears down on the United States, what steps would you take, and we're not talking about recovery efforts now, what steps would you take to protect New York City from storm surge?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think we're doing enough in that area. After Sandy, we still don't have enough protections in place to have New York City have New York City deal with these issues. For example, Mayor Bloomberg put together a $20 billion proposal back when he was mayor to shore up our shoreline and to address some of the problems that Sandy impacted Staten Island, Rockaway, Breezy Point, places like that. We're basically, that's been forgotten. I want to bring that back when I'm mayor. I want to restore the focus, because we've seen what's happening in Houston, and it's going to happen in New York City, and get state and federal money to protect our shoreline and protect the city as a whole. We're just not doing enough in that area. We had a great proposal, and they just went by the wayside.
Well, Mr. Mayor, what steps have you taken, to protect New York City from storms?
Thank you for the question, Juliet, and it's a very powerful one right now. Look, in fact, we're in the middle of spending $20 billion right now. It's a matter of public record to protect all New Yorkers against all of the challenges of climate change. Look at what has happened in the Rockaways alone. The new boardwalk, 5.5 miles that we opened just a few months ago, is also a resiliency barrier for a huge swath of the Rockaways. That's one example of many. We're putting protections in place, working with our federal partners like the Army Corps of Engineers. So thank God New York City is better protected than it was 5 years ago, but we have more to do. This is something we'll be working on for years and years, spending $20 billion to keep us safe in every part of the city. And I think, look, the fact is that we must confront climate change at the root, which is why when President Trump abandoned the Paris Accords, New York City took the lead and said, we're going to double down on the Paris Agreement. We're going to go even farther at addressing emissions. We're going to be part of that solution while we also take action on resiliency.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. Jillian Jorgensen.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese,
yes.
New York City's homeless population is staggering. Nearly 60,000 New Yorkers are currently sleeping in shelters. What is your specific plan to reduce that number?
Well, first of all, I'm going to basically abandon and scrap all of the mayor's zoning proposals, because they have contributed to displacement. His proposal calls for building luxury towers in many neighborhoods around the city with a sliver of so-called affordable housing, which has driven those property values. Speculators have moved in there, and people are being driven into shelters. 30% of the people work that are in shelters in New York City. I want to build true affordable housing. I've got a bill that would tax foreign investors who buy luxury real estate in the city and funnel that into an affordable housing fund that people in those zip codes could actually afford. We have 1,000 parcels that the city owns. I want to build true affordable housing there, because his plan has caused a lot of devastation around the city, from Jerome Avenue in the Bronx, from El Barrio to Crown Heights to Sunnyside. People are revolting because this is the end product of his proposal. I also will prioritize families that work. 30% of the families in the shelters work, and I want to subsidize their rent.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, since your long-term plan for homelessness only reduces the number of people in shelter by 2,500 out of the roughly 60,000 over 5 years, a drop in the bucket, does that mean that you accept homelessness as a fact of life in New York City?
No, I do not. This is going to be a long and tough battle to reduce the amount of homelessness and to address the root causes of it, but we're putting a lot of the pieces in place to do it. Let me tell you, first of all, the truth about my affordable housing plan, and here it is. We have, for the first time ever, required developers to create affordable housing when they ask city permission to develop. We're literally saying this. We're going to have affordable housing built, and it's going to be paid for by developers. 25% in some cases, 30% of the apartments in other cases. That's a matter of law now. That's never existed previously in New York City. That is part of how we make a change. But look, to get to the root causes of homelessness is about the biggest affordable housing creation program in the history of the city, which we're doing right now. We'll reach 500,000 New Yorkers. It's about reaching homeless folks on the street with our Homestead initiative, the most intensive homeless outreach effort in the city's history. 900 people have come off the street and now are living in shelter. It's about getting people to go into shelter out. We've gotten 60,000 plus people who ended up in shelter to better and permanent affordable housing. There's a lot of pieces we have to do, including addressing the mental health issues that underlie why some people become homeless to begin with, which we're doing through the Thrive NYC initiative. So it's a long battle, but one I believe we can win.
Sorry,
but in the meantime, Mr. Mayor, people are still on the street.
Continue.
What do we do about them?
Exactly what I said. The best thing we can do for people on the street is to go with an intensive outreach effort, which is called Homestat, reach them continually until our homeless outreach workers win their trust and get them to come in. Unlike the past efforts, which unfortunately did not result in a major change of what was happening on the street, for the first time in the last year and a half, 900 people who were street homeless, living 24 hours on the street, have actually come in, accepted shelter, accepted mental health support and other services. This is something I think could fundamentally change the future for our city. It's only just begun, but it's showing tremendous promise.
Okay, similar topic here.
Could I?
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know what city Bill's living in, but if you, I ride the subways. I'm out on the streets. Homelessness is at an epidemic level. They've obviously mismanaged the problem, and mental health is not being targeted to people who really need it. A lot of the folks are walking around the city who need help. Some of them explode on the streets of the city. The problem is mismanaged, and his plan to build 90 shelters, saturate the city with shelters, is totally inadequate because shelters are dangerous and poorly managed. I want to build true affordable housing. What he's building is not affordable for most
Just a quick clarification, if I may, on that factual point. We're going to be closing down the hotels that are being used to house the homeless, closing down the cluster sites, which are substandard housing that for decades was used to house the homeless. We're going to create decent shelters, and we're going to make sure that people live close to the community they come from, which is also going to change the attitude that communities have towards the homeless who literally come from their own neighborhood.
We're going to move on. Similar topic here, Mr. Mayor. Have you come to see gentrification as a necessary evil in our city? If so, what do you say to people who hate it and they're being forced out of their homes and their neighborhoods?
I've said many times, gentrification is a double-edged sword. And what we have to do is use the power of government to address some of the challenges that gentrification achieves. You know, in the previous administrations, gentrification just happened, grew and grew and grew. Nothing was done by the government to address it. Here's what we're doing. The biggest affordable housing initiative we've ever had in the history of this city, enough for 500,000 New Yorkers. We're going to subsidize people to stay in their apartments. We're going to build 80,000 new apartments. People are going to pay a third of their income in rent, which is a truly affordable standard. We're also going at the rules of the game. We're requiring developers to create affordable housing as a matter of law. We're finally giving fairness to renters, too. We had a rent freeze for 2 years. That never happened in the city's history because we ensured that the Rent Guidelines Board actually represented the truth and the facts, not the landlord interest. These are the ways you address gentrification head on. You can't be passive about it. You have to be very activist and energetic to get at the problems because people are fearful of being displaced, and our government has to step in to do the most we can to protect people.
Mr. Albanese?
Well, clearly, his plan has been an unmitigated disaster because people are revolting around the city. It's not Sal Albanese making this an issue. Jerome Avenue, El Barrio, Crown Heights, Sunnyside, Queens, because they realize that the housing that's being built is basically good for developers. Luxury developers are doing very well in the city. We should be using nonprofit developers. We should be targeting housing to people who can afford them in those zip codes. The developers who contribute a lot of money to build are doing very, very well. The people are not. People are earning $30,000, $35,000 a year in the city, $40,000, cannot afford to live here. Displacement is at a record level. That's why the homeless population has skyrocketed in this city, and it's being poorly managed by this administration. I thought that Bill, who chaired the General Welfare Committee, the City Council for years, had oversight over this, would be somewhat knowledgeable in this area, and he's dropped the ball.
Let me just present an important point.
We need to move on here.
I have to respond. That's a factual point that's wrong.
What's
the affordable housing plan requires developers to create affordable housing. That's never happened before. That's a matter of law. And we challenge landlords. They sued me, by the way. The landlord lobby sued me when we had the rent freezes, even though the rent freezes were totally fair according to the facts. But I beat them in court, and the rent freezes went through for over 2 million New Yorkers. Again, this is a different approach to affordable housing, and it's one that is reaching millions of New Yorkers.
Okay, thank you both. We got to move on here. Marcia.
Mr. Mayor, the mayors deserve to know where you stand, exactly where you stand on the statue of Christopher Columbus in Columbus Circle. Why can't you tell us flat out whether you'll remove it.
Look, I think the right way to handle all the issues that have been brought up is to have a commission that looks at all of these matters, comes up with, as best as possible, a universal standard for how we move going forward.
What's your personal opinion?
That commission is about to be named, and I don't think it makes sense for me to opine on issue by issue. I can say one thing in general about what I feel.
Don't you think the voters deserve to know where you stand?
I can say one thing about what I feel, and it's a very important thing to me. I'm a proud Italian American. Italian Americans in this country, and I heard this from my own mother, my own aunts, from their own experience growing up as children of immigrants in this country. They went through discrimination. To this day, Italians are horribly stereotyped in so many ways in the media. I understand why so many Italian Americans feel deeply about this issue, but I believe the right thing to do is to look at all of these issues together and try and come up as best we can a common standard. I'm very, very proud of my heritage, but I also think we have to look at all these historical issues and try and figure out something that allows us all to move forward and put the past behind us.
So the Los Angeles mayor has changed the name of the Columbus Day Parade to the Indigenous Peoples Day, Indigenous Peoples Parade. My question to you is, would you do the same, but would you also think about changing the school holiday, Columbus Day, to Indigenous People Day?
You know, I've been asked the question before about the Columbus Day Parade. I intend to march in the parade as I have
Well, what about
for
changing
many,
the
many
name?
years. I have no intention to change any names. The question before this commission is about monuments, statues, markers. That's what this commission will look at. And they'll look at across the board on any and all issues that are brought to them by New Yorkers. We're going to open this up to everyday New Yorkers to offer their views of how we deal with complex history on a lot of different issues with the goal of moving past it as a unified city. Look, it's a time of division in our country, and this is why a lot of this has been dredged up. There's a lot of pain being caused by Donald Trump and a lot of other people on the right.
You know,
we need to move past it, and this commission's the right way to do it.
Mr. Mayor, there's been a lot of issues. There's a lot of people who have good and they have bad. What about Grant? What about Malcolm X? Are you going to do things with Grant's tomb, Malcolm X's statue?
Again, March, the same answer. There's going to be a process.
You don't want to take a position
look at
on it?
anything that New Yorkers bring forward. That's the right way to handle it.
Don't you think voters should know how you feel?
I think that we are setting up an objective and smart process to look at all these issues and to find a common way to move forward as a city. I think that's the right way to handle it.
Why can't you give them your opinion?
It's what I feel.
Well,
Mr. Albanese, your opinion.
Yeah, well, no one argues that the Confederacy statues should come down. They should come down because they represent treason, they represent racism. But when you get into Christopher Columbus, it's a slippery slope. I don't need a commission to tell me that the Christopher Columbus statue should not come down. And what he's done with his commission is created more schisms and more divisions. It's vintage Bill. What we need to do is, I'm an Italian immigrant, so the Italian immigrants built that statue in the 1890s because of the discrimination that they faced during that period of time. They didn't know about Columbus's controversial past. It's a source of pride. I support a proposal by my running mate for public advocate, David Eisenbach, who's a professor at Columbia, and what he says is, let's have a discussion about Columbus at the Circle. We put up different plaques and talk about his bad legacy as well as his good legacy. You know, the fact that he engaged in the slave trade, that he did commit some atrocities against Native Americans. But let's not have a commission. That is going to cause more schisms, and the slippery slope we get into there is outrageous.
You know,
once again,
just a quick comment. There's been truth and reconciliation commissions around the world. Having an open process is very good for society.
It's very divisive, Bill, and you know it.
No, I think it's good for a way to people move forward.
Your ally, Melissa Mark Viverito, wants to take the statue down, and you didn't have the guts to say no to her.
I think it's a good process to help us move forward, and we've seen similar things around the world that actually help people to address the issues of the past so we could move to the future.
Okay, we're going to move on here. Juliet.
Okay, Mr. Albanese, one of the ways you differ from Mayor de Blasio is that you have supported stop, question, and frisk. Now, is it necessary, given that crime is at an all-time low in New York City?
Julie, first of all, stop, question, and frisk is legal when it's done constitutionally. I'm a lawyer, and it's a valuable tool. Was it overused in the past? Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, even the prior administration started to reduce stop, question, and frisk. But it's a valuable tool that has a constitutional backing, and it's something that the police could use when they see something happening. There's a very clear pattern that officers can use to stop somebody and question them. And let's not forget, I'm glad you said stop questioning, because often cops just question people. They don't throw them up against a wall and frisk them. And I think it's a tool that the cops need. But I certainly believe it was overused, and it's a valuable tool, which is legal when done constitutionally.
Do you think police have backed off too much?
Well, I think there's a major demoralization within the police force. 95% of police officers disapprove of the mayor because he's played politics with policing. I think James Comey, who's the head of the FBI, said that there is a trend where police officers are afraid to move because they're afraid they're going to wind up on the front page of the news when they see something wrong, something that is happening, and some officers back off because they don't want to wind up in the front page of the paper if they make a mistake.
Okay, thank you.
I just need to speak to this and just say at the outset, a lot of things that you just heard were not true, and here's the essential truth. Our officers are doing an outstanding job. The men and women of the NYPD just achieved a historic record, the safest August in the history of this city. Amazing progress in reducing shootings and homicides. We are the safest big city in America, and we're getting safer. And there's a lot of energy and effort and professionalism coming from the men and women of the NYPD, and a lot of people look forward to joining their ranks. So let's be clear. We reduced stop and frisk 93% in 4 years. Crime went down all 4 years because we're bringing police and community together. We're getting rid of the divisions of the past.
I do want to follow up with you, Mr. Mayor. 3 years ago, you talked about having conversations with your son, Dante, conversations that many parents have who have children of color, about how to deal with the NYPD. Now, after the reforms that have taken place, the reforms you initiated, would your conversation change, and how?
Juliet, it's a great question, and look, I think we're making real progress in New York City. Complaints against our officers are at the lowest level they've been in 15 years. Those stops that used to cause so much pain to parents and grandparents of good young men and women, again, down 93%. Neighborhood policing is bringing police and community closer together. There's much more dialogue. There's much more people getting to literally know each other on a first-name basis in common cause. This is creating a new atmosphere. It will take more time. We've got more work to do, but I got to tell you, with things like the advent of body cameras, which will be instituted in the next 2 years, I'm thoroughly convinced that more and more New Yorkers are going to feel that there's going to be mutual understanding between police and community,
so
that we can approach this in a way that was never imaginable in the past.
So how do you think that conversation could change, or what would you like to see change?
I want to see that conversation change for hundreds of thousands of parents, and I've talked to a lot of parents in this city who once felt they needed to have that conversation. I look forward to the day soon where they will no longer feel that's necessary, where they're going to see that everyone is being treated fairly and equally.
What would you tell Dante today if you had to have that conversation all over again?
Well, he's an adult now, and he makes his own decisions, but it's, again, what I would say is always respect the specific instructions of a police officer, listen to them, do exactly what they say. That's what I've always said, and I think that's the right approach for people of any background.
Well, let me say that the reduction in stop, question, and frisk started under the Bloomberg administration. The numbers have been down. That's a good thing. The problem with the crime stats is that you take the Mott Haven section of the Bronx, crime is up there. You take the northern Bronx, crime is up in that area. The subways, sexual assaults in the subway system are up 54%. So crime stats have to be analyzed depending on where you live in the city, and that is something that we need to address. I want to see more officers on our subway cars, walking through the cars, because there's a lot of uneasiness on the subway. We don't have enough of that going on.
Okay.
So also crime, by the way, crime has been going down since the last year of the Dinkins administration. Despite Bill's efforts, crime is continuing to go down. That's great, because the cops are doing a great job.
There's too many facts being left out. Very simply, stop and frisk is down 93% in the last 4 years since I've been in office. Men and women of the NYPD have achieved historic reductions in crime. I think that the effort to say, oh, look, crime is going up here and there is disingenuous. disingenuous. If you look at the facts, we've still got some problems, of course. We've got some areas we've got to address. But overall and consistently across the 5 boroughs, crime is going down because of the hard work of the men and women of the NYPD working with community allies. To suggest anything less denigrates the work of our police officers.
Listen, that's funny. This is a man that police officers in this city, frustrated over his actions, turned their back on him 3 times. I don't agree with that, but they were frustrated because they feel that this mayor does not support their efforts. And I respect the bulk of the rank and file. They do a great job. They're the main reason why crime is down, not because of Bill. And he has not respected the officers in this city, and they feel it. It's not. I've never seen officers at a funeral turn their back on the mayor 3 times.
The number of mistruths is overwhelming. We've added 2,000 officers on patrol. We added additional training for our officers, new vests, new equipment, new technology. Our officers know they're getting a lot of support. I'm very honored to have chosen Bill Bratton as my first commissioner, Jimmy O'Neill as my second commissioner, people who are deeply respected by the men and women of the NYPD.
Education here. Thank you both. From Mr. Albanese, the city's Kids PAC yesterday gave the current administration a grade of F for school class size and overcrowding, saying more than 500,000 children are affected. Mr. Albanese, what would you do to relieve this today, right now?
Great question, because the tragic number about our school system is that 63% of kids graduating from high school cannot do college work. The politically massaged numbers where Bill has shown some increase in math and reading scores, of course, leaving out the fact that the poor performing schools are doing worse under his watch. As a former public school teacher, what I would do is direct resources to reduce class size, because teachers will tell you that's the best way to get optimum educational outcomes. I would also reduce our focus on standardized testing. We're teaching to the test. These kids are coming into these buildings and they're not passionate about education. They become test takers. And I want to move away from that. I want to produce kids that are innovators, that are independent thinkers. None of that is happening right now. And those parents yesterday were great, because they gave Bill the grade he deserved when it comes to public education, an F. He spent $532 million on renewal schools with terrible results.
Mr. Mayor?
Again, I have to answer the facts.
Almost half of the schools, kids are overcrowded. How do you fix that right here, right now?
I'll answer after answering this point. The facts were wrong once again. Listen, that answer you heard a moment ago denigrates the efforts of our educators. We have the highest graduation rate in the history of New York City. Test scores have gone up 4 years in a row. Our educators are doing extraordinary things to reach our children. We know we have a lot more work to do. Pre-K is going to be a huge part of the solution. 3K coming right behind it. A focus on getting all of our kids on reading level by 3rd grade, something that's never been done before in the history of the city. That's where we're putting our investments. To not recognize that steady progress really is disrespectful to our educators and our parents who are working so hard to support their kids. To the class size issue, we have added a huge amount of additional money, billions of dollars, to increase the amount of construction of new school buildings and to expand the buildings that we have already with annexes and other facilities, pre-K centers, so we can additionally reach kids in neighborhoods that are overcrowded. This is another one that's going to be a long battle, because in fact, in some neighborhoods of the city, the number of school kids has ballooned in recent years. We have a lot more to do to catch up, but we're steadily investing in addressing overcrowding and making our schools better for our kids.
Listen, thank you. I think we got.
Could I follow up on this?
I think we got the idea. We need to.
I'm a former teacher. I have to comment on this stuff.
We've got to go. Thank you, Jillian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Albanese.
Yes.
1/3 of the adult immigrant population either doesn't speak English or does not have a high school diploma. As an immigrant yourself, as you mentioned, what would you do to help these New Yorkers achieve English proficiency and participate fully in the city?
Well, I just go back to my own experiences. When I came here from Italy at the age of 8, I couldn't speak English, and basically, when I went into school, they started working with me, bilingual first, and then I absorbed the English language. So we're going to do outreach to those immigrant kids to make sure that they're getting. But
what about adults? The question is about adults.
Adults. We need more. Well, we used to have in our schools evening programs for immigrants to come in and learn English. We're not doing enough of that area. I'm going to expand that because, as I said, I'm very sensitive to the immigrant experience, and we're not doing enough in that area. And I think every school in the city, especially in immigrant communities, should have these adult education programs so we bring these folks in and assimilate them and have them learn the English language.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, the same question to you. You've been lobbied hard on this issue at budget time. What have you done in your time in office to address this issue?
We've had a great expansion of our dual language programs in schools all over the city. They've been very, very successful. And look, also in terms of giving kids who are new to this country the best opportunity, I'm convinced early childhood education is a crucial piece of the equation. Kids during pre-K have an amazing ability to learn in more than one language, actually. The same will be true at the 3-year-old level. We missed the boat as a city for decades. We didn't focus on early childhood education, which was the time we could help kids grow intellectually and certainly to learn a new language, including if they had to learn English.
But again,
we're
what
doing
can
that
you do for adults?
For adults, the point about bringing adults into the schools that their kids go to, we now have 215 community schools where the focus is on engaging the whole family and bringing them in for things exactly like adult literacy and English as a second language. The community schools have been proven to be very successful at engaging parents so that they also will focus on all the needs of their children in their education. We are going to keep expanding that initiative.
I'm sorry.
Okay, Marcia.
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if you smoke marijuana, and since you decriminalized possession of small amounts...
Was that a present tense or past tense, Marcia?
Well, you could take your pick. You could
Currently,
take your pick.
no.
In the past?
Once or twice when I was at NYU, yes.
Okay, but what about now?
No.
Okay, so since you decriminalized possession...
Some days I wish I did, Marcia.
What? I wish you did?
Some days I wish I did.
Like now? But the question is this. Since you decriminalized possession of small amounts of marijuana, should people be able to buy it on the streets of New York City?
No, look, I believe the laws we have now are the right laws. I think we're going to have a lot more information now available to us as we see other states decriminalize. We're going to learn from their experience and see what it might tell us. But right now in this city where we've continually driven down crime, we're the safest big city in America, we're dealing with marijuana offenses much more fairly. Small levels possession alone is not cause for arrest anymore, only for summons.
So you would still arrest people if they buy it on the street?
Again, the laws we have now, I believe in. We, the NYPD and City Hall, decided to not have arrest any longer for low-level possession, but there still is arrest for smoking marijuana, selling marijuana, other categories. I think these are the right laws right now. I think we're going to have a chance to review them going forward as we see the experience of other states and other cities.
Mr. Albanese,
60,000 kids, mainly of color, have been arrested for smoking weed. I have a very firm opinion that we need to legalize marijuana as other states are doing it. Would
you be able to buy it on the streets of New York City?
No, I would not on the streets.
Would you be able to buy it and not face criminal prosecution?
We would follow the Colorado model, where there will be places where you can buy marijuana for recreational use and use the tax money to improve our schools, to make our city reduce class size. I think what I want to do is have a forum, put it on the ballot, a referendum where we basically get the opinion of New Yorkers, New York City residents, on whether we should follow 26 other states and legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. My firm opinion is that we should, but I will listen to the voters.
We need to move on.
Yes, thank you. Before we let you go, do you smoke it past or present?
I've never, I hope you don't think I'm a square, but I never smoked marijuana. So I don't think it's, by the way, I don't think it's a good thing, but neither is alcohol. Bottom line is that, the laws that we have make things worse. But I've never smoked marijuana, no. And I went to college where everybody was smoking it around me. I just couldn't ingest smoke into my lungs.
Thank you. And you did not inhale. We're going to. Thank you, Juliet.
Okay, for Mr. Mayor. The only things that stopped the car that mowed people down in Times Square were the metal stanchions on the sidewalk. With terrorists using vehicles as weapons across the world, should these stanchions be erected more frequently in more places, more popular places, or more frequented places?
Thank you for that question. Very important question. Look, the NYPD has the strongest anti-terror efforts of any police force in the country, the strongest capacity. And my administration added to it. We created the 500-plus member Critical Response Command, specifically to have full-time officers focused on preventing terror, and God forbid if there were an act of terror, responding to it. We learn from every incident the things we have to do differently. We learn from incidents overseas, and I meet with the police commissioner regularly. We make decisions on changes we have to make based on what we see. For example, recent parades, major parades in the city, you've noticed the cross streets are not open anymore across some of our biggest parades. We learned that because of some tragic incidents we saw overseas. We put blocker trucks up now.
So
in terms of the bollards, the bollards or stanchions are being increased in certain areas of the city, and we're constantly assessing other areas that need it. This is something we will be doing for a long time, but I want to assure my fellow New Yorkers we have the best intelligence gathering capacity of any police force in the country. We also have the most officers devoted to stopping terror of any police force in the country.
Will they be added in Times Square? Where this
there have been additional measures added already in Times Square. There's a very substantial police presence in Times Square, but this is something we will literally be making constant revisions to and improvements to, and we will be adding additional protections in various parts of the city wherever we see it warranted.
All right, Mr. Albanese, same question. What do you think? Do you think the stanchions work? Are they significant, and where would you put them?
Well, I would leave that to the anti-terrorist folks in NYPD. Stanchions do work, but Bill's right. We do have one of the very best anti-terrorist teams in the world, in New York. And we unfortunately have had some terrible incidents here. And I would leave that up to my anti-terrorist team. And as I said, I have a lot of confidence in those people. They're doing a great job. And Bill's right on that. We're probably the best in the world in that area.
Thank you both. Mr. Mayor, there's an explosion of construction all over the city. Everybody notices it every day. It jams our streets, sometimes both sides of the streets. We get the impression it's not being monitored particularly closely. Will you commit to giving out more fines to construction companies that take out all these extra lanes, and many of them do it without permission?
Maurice, absolutely. Look, we do have a construction boom, and it comes with some real challenges. It also comes, of course, with some good things, a lot of jobs created, and it helps grow our economy for the future. It's part of why we have 400,000 new jobs in the city in the last 4 years. But we have to address the challenges. We're working right now on a package of construction safety legislation. We absolutely are going to aggressively and even more aggressively enforce areas where construction companies take up more space than they need to, including more parking spaces than they need to. This is something the police commissioner and I have talked about several times, and NYPD is going to be doing more and more enforcement in that area. We have to, and we've added, to address congestion issues around construction, we've added hundreds more traffic enforcement agents so they can be placed at some of those key sites where there's additional congestion because of construction. So this is a real concern. I hear it from New Yorkers all the time. We understand some of this construction for sure indicates something good and healthy about this city, but we also know we've got to do a lot more to make sure things keep flowing.
Mr. Albanese, same question.
Well,
more fines?
We have the worst congestion problem in the city's history, and I've got a couple of proposals to address it. But I would say that we need coordinators, transportation and buildings folks around these construction projects, so that we can monitor what's going on, because there's a lot of, it's almost like a Wild West atmosphere out there, Maurice. And you're right, people are concerned. We've had almost 34 construction workers killed in the last 2 years because nobody's monitoring this construction that's going on in the city. As I said, I would put a lot more resources into coordinating these projects where the construction, the companies, the developers who have to follow the law, they simply can't helter-skelter decide to close down streets of the city, which is what they're doing right now.
So yes, more tickets, more fines?
If we need to do that, yes, we need to do that. But I don't think we're doing enough to coordinate. I don't think people know what's going on out there. The city's not doing enough in that area.
Okay, thank you. Juliet?
Okay, this is for both of you. First, Mr. Mayor. Your administration is now issuing summonses instead of arrest warrants in most cases of public urination, pot possession, and open containers. this program has been so successful, if it has been so successful, and why is the Westchester Square Business Improvement District in the Bronx having to hire private security to protect businesses and customers from what they see as an increase in violations and that kind of behavior?
I'm not familiar with their specific concerns, but I will follow up on them. But I'll tell you this, the NYPD very much believes that this is the right direction to go on in terms of the quality of life in the city and how we use our police officers. Look, crime has gone down continually. We are the safest big city in America. We've been addressing violent crime and quality of life offenses because I believe in quality of life policing. We're doing it working with neighborhoods. We're working with community residents to figure out how to address the problems. The complaints come from residents, and our police officers address them. But we also found in too many cases arrest was the go-to option, and it wasn't the best option. This is something both Commissioner Bratton and Commissioner O'Neill felt very deeply, that we needed to recognize arrest was not always the best choice. Summons could be a very good and powerful tool and would also be a better use of our police resources. So I am very convinced we're continuing to drive down crime. I said yesterday when we announced the extraordinary numbers for August, the safest August in the city's history, that we're going to continue to get safer. And we're also going to continue to have more and more police resources freed up to address these quality of life issues as well.
Mr. Albanese?
Quality of life conditions have to be addressed. You can't have people urinating on the streets of the city. And the officers still have the option of arresting someone. But the way to do it initially is to do it by issuing a summons. I think that's a good approach. And the community policing model is a good model, and I support it because that will work. That means that communities will work with the officers to address quality of life conditions in the city. But you cannot allow the quality of life to erode in neighborhoods. People are concerned about noise. They're concerned about public drunkenness. All of that stuff has to be enforced.
So should they return to prosecuting those infractions?
Well, if they're repeat offenders, yes. If they're repeat offenders, yes. First, you give them a warning. Secondly, you issue a summons. And if that doesn't work, you should go after them, because communities, look, communities have a right to sleep at night. They have a right to be free from noise. That people should not be urinating on people's stoops. When I was a council member in Bay Ridge, I worked very closely with the 6A precinct. We addressed a lot of those issues. Public drunkenness was a big concern, and you know, my constituents appreciated that, and I think most New Yorkers want to be able to.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, Marcia.
Sal Albanese. So the mayor's millionaire's tax to fix the subways has little support in Albany. However, congestion pricing is picking up steam. I wonder what you think of a modified tolling of the free East River bridges, charging $2.75, the price of a subway token, and a fraction of what they charge on MTA bridges to raise revenue and fix the subways.
All right, Marcia, it's a great question. I support congestion pricing because it's irresponsible not to do that. The traffic situation is out of control. And would also lower tolls on the Verrazano, the Throgsneck, and the Whitestone by 35%.
What about charging the price of a subway token?
Charging for coming into
on the free East River bridges.
I'd like the Move New York plan. I like the Move New York plan that really lowers the tolls for those three major bridges, imposes tolls on the East River bridges and in central Manhattan. But I also would provide reduced discounts for people who live in Bayside, Hollis, and parts of the city that are in transit deserts.
I wonder how you would feel about supporting a $2.75 toll, the price of a subway ride on the East River bridges.
I've never supported congestion pricing. I think it's a regressive tax, and we haven't even seen a plan from Albany that we can assess. But I'll tell you what, the millionaire's tax can and will pass in Albany. I believe this fundamentally. Asking those millionaires and billionaires who have done so well to pay a little more in income tax here in this city so the rest of us can get around. And an added feature, part of this tax would pay for the fair fare, allowing low-income New Yorkers to get half-price Metro cards. I think this is something we can generate a lot of support for.
The legislature has told you, the Senate has told you they're not going to pass the millionaire's tax. So what's, you know, you can't wait 2 years to see if the Senate changes hands. What will you do now to try to fix the subways? They need the money now.
There's an election next year that's going to determine the future, and I've said I fundamentally believe
November
largely
2018, they don't take office until January
they take office
19.
in January 2019, which is very, very soon. But even in the meantime, if folks in Albany want to address this problem, The millionaire's tax is the best way to go about it. It's sustainable. The resources are there.
Do it, so what will you
that
support?
People change their mind when they look at the facts, because there is no other alternative right now. We don't have a congestion pricing plan in Albany to actually weigh. The only viable option that's been put on the table by legislators in Albany and by me is the millionaire's tax.
Marcia, could I comment on that?
Just 20 seconds here.
Bill, this is a failed plan. He's rolled it out 3 times. He knows it's not going to pass Albany. I know. Everybody knows. It's a way to cover his tracks for 3.5 years of allowing the mass transit system to melt down in this city, where he said it wasn't his job for 3.5 years. It's a political ploy that he rolls out
That's
each and every.
That's factually untrue.
Factually accurate.
Gentlemen, we have to move on. We're going to run out of time here. We are just, 6 days now before primary day. I'm sure each of you has a burning question you'd like to ask each other. Mr. Albanese, let's start with you.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, Sal.
What was that? You promised me in the last debate that you were going to produce a list of donors that you did nothing for their large contributions. And you produced this op-ed piece last Friday, of course, at the end of the weekend when everybody was away, which was an insult to all New Yorkers. Here's what you produced: 0 in terms of people that you did nothing for. So how could you attacked the press, and you basically went out there and displaced all of the responsibility on other folks? Why did you lie to me that you said you were going to produce this list?
Well,
when you didn't produce it. Why did you lie, Bill?
That's factually untrue as well. I said, I'm the person who put forward the idea, I said I wanted to present to New Yorkers the truth, which is that there's all sorts of people who make campaign donations and then ask for things and don't get what they ask for. And I gave some very prominent examples and some very clearly known, well-known public examples where people asked and just didn't get what they wanted, no matter how rich they were, no matter how powerful they were. And that is what we do in this administration. We make decisions based on the merits. So I said I wanted to provide some examples to people. I did provide those examples.
You did not,
but the bottom line, that's your interpretation.
You did not,
I'm very comfortable. We put something forward that really makes the point that should be talked about more often.
Okay.
There's a lot of people in public service who, despite this madness of an electoral system that requires people to go and ask anyone for donations, which I'd like to end. I'd like to see public financing of elections altogether.
I got my plan,
but
Mr.
you know
Mayor.
what? We've made clear you can give money, but that does not guarantee anything.
Your turn to ask him a question, please.
Sure. Sal, I read an article in the last few days, and it was discussing the issue of how to deal with Donald Trump. I have been very clear. I've said it many times. A lot of journalists have asked me, shouldn't you attempt to find some common ground with Donald Trump? Shouldn't you attempt to placate him? I've said Donald Trump only understands strength. The only way to deal with him is to stand up to him. We did it yesterday on DACA. We're going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing it. You said in the article you thought there was a different way to handle Donald Trump, maybe to work with him more. I would love to hear what that looks like.
Well, to use your term, it's factually inaccurate.
I read it in the newspaper.
It's factually inaccurate.
I read it in the newspaper.
I don't know what paper you read, Bill. But I can tell you this, that I find Donald Trump's policies abhorrent, and I will stand up to him as aggressively as you will, but I also realize that I've got to deal with HUD. I've got to deal with the Department of Transportation. I don't want to get into a personal grudge match with him like you did. You went out and protested in front of his building. You're the mayor of the city.
Well, wait. Just for clarification, you're saying that the mayor of New York City standing up to Donald Trump and protesting in front of his building is a bad idea? I think it was an important thing to do.
You're not a cheerleader. You're the mayor of the city of New York.
So it's not right to protest Donald Trump if he does something that's hurting New Yorkers. I would argue that the mayor of New York City should lead the charge against Donald Trump when he's hurting New Yorkers.
I think what you do is you oppose him aggressively. But you also have to realize that you do have to work with agencies. As a matter of fact, you went to Washington and met with the Secretary of Transportation, and I plan on doing the same thing. I will aggressively oppose Donald Trump. I will fight him on DACA. I will fight him on all of the policies that affect New York City.
But you wouldn't protest him.
Thank you. I think we got it.
The mayor of New York City should not be a cheerleader.
We only have just a few seconds here. This is a lightning round. Quick question, quick answer. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Mayor. Your Red Sox have been accused of using technology to steal signs from our Yankees. Should they be penalized, even prevented from going to the playoffs or the World Series?
Maurice, my faith has been shaken.
Yes or no?
If these allegations are true, they absolutely should be punished.
Mr. Albanese?
Well, I hate the Red Sox.
Okay. Mr.
That was a factual statement.
Got it. To ease traffic congestion, would you reopen Broadway and Times Square and Herald Square to cars?
No, I think that's a mistake.
Mr. Mayor?
I wouldn't change the current approach now.
In a hypothetical matchup in next year's Democratic primary for governor, Mr. Albanese, Andrew Cuomo versus, say, Cynthia Nixon, who would you vote for?
That's I don't know yet.
Mr. Mayor.
Not doing hypotheticals, Maurice.
Come on.
It's 2017.
You praised Shelley Silver as a man of integrity. Should he go to jail, Mr. Mayor?
Again, that's for the court system to decide. We're all very disappointed in what happened with him, and it's for the court
Jail,
system.
yes or no? Got to go?
Yes.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you. It's time for closing remarks. And let me see. Do I have it right here? Who do we have first? It was a coin toss. And Mr. Albanese, you go first. 1 minute, please.
Thank you. I came here from Italy at the age of 8, we were raised by my mother on a garment worker's salary. I attended the public schools in New York City, graduated from CUNY College, went on to teach in the New York City public schools for 11 years, served on the city council for 15 years and earned a reputation for honesty and integrity. I went to law school at night and worked in finance and law, mainly with labor and working people. Those experiences qualify me for the best job in America, which is being mayor of New York City. I have a passion for helping New Yorkers. My vision is to make the city more livable. I want to fix our transit system, reform our political system, save our small businesses, stop unfettered development, which is eroding the character of our city. And I want to attract the best and the brightest in New York City government. I'm asking for your vote next week in the Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Albanese. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. This is your city. That's my message to all New Yorkers. It has to work for you. We've brought down stop and frisk 93%, but we've got more to do to bring police and community together. That's why we're going to have body cameras on every officer in the next 2 years. We've achieved pre-K for all our kids. We have to go farther now for 3K. Every 3-year-old needs to be reached. We're having an affordable housing plan that's going to reach 500,000 New Yorkers. But you know what? We need to do even more. We have to create 100,000 new good-paying jobs for everyday New Yorkers so they can afford to live in the city they love. And Lord knows we got to keep taking on Donald Trump, and I guarantee you I will continue to do that. I need your support to continue this work. I ask for your vote on Tuesday, September 12th, so we can make sure New York City is always a city for everyone.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for a very interesting and at times spirited debate. We thank you also, our panel, Juliet Popper, Marcia Kramer, and Jillian Jorgensen. We also want to thank the fine folks here at the City University of New York for hosting us. I'm Maurice Dubois. We'll see you on the news tonight, CBS 2 at 11. And as we wrap up here, we thank you so much for watching. In just a moment, a message from the Campaign Finance Board reminding you to vote next Tuesday, September 12th, in New York City's Democratic primary. Have a great evening, everyone.